Okay, red team, we're about ready to start back up on our next talk here. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first official red team talk. First speaker is going to be Patrick Perry, and Patrick Perry is going to be talking about using hacking RF to integrated digital, this is the big wall that's somewhere in...
There's a big wall, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in some place blocking somebody's view or something.
You pretty much just told my talk.
No, I'm sorry. So I'm going to let Patrick introduce himself and give you this talk.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Perry. I'm not nearly as energetic as Ed, so you might want coffee or whatever. I'm just not going to be flying around the room. If anyone wants to come closer, there's plenty of open spots up here. Before I get started, people have been coming up to me asking me, what is the deal with this wall? It's a funny story. So before I go too far, I really struggled with coming up with a title for this talk because it's a weird thing that happened. A lot of things that happened to me as I've traveled around the country a lot as a consultant is people assume that because I'm from New England, I speak like I'm from South Boston. I don't. The next thing I would mention is I'm not an expert in HackRFs, but this particular talk and what this whole subject is around, there's sort of a lot of different angles to it, so I wanted to touch on a few different things. Just let it sink in, and it all makes sense in a few minutes. And this is probably my favorite. This is the most simple, but if I just put this on the talk up front, what the hell's that? So, like I said, my name is Patrick Perry. I work for FireEye. I'm a systems engineer there. I work for a guy, Chris Sanders here, who a lot of you may know. Prior to working for FireEye, I was a special agent with DHS out of Boston. And while I was a special agent there, I specialized in computer crime. So I had a lot of formal training in host-based forensics, so I consider that to be my expertise. So like I said, this HackRF stuff, it's fun, but I'm a novice at it. I'm not an expert in it. It's just a tool I use to do a job. Somewhere in there, I worked on the GE cert for a while. I bring that up because while I consider my technical expertise to be more in host-based forensics, at GE I specialized on the cert, more in the network side of things. And I had a very fortunate situation there. Some of you might know Jack Crook, who you might have seen on Twitter. In my opinion, he's one of the best incident responders in the world. And he sat right next to me there in Greater Detroit for 3 years. And I bring that up because it's not a situation that a lot of people that are trying to break into the field find themselves in. So I was very fortunate. If you're not as fortunate as I was, and you're looking to learn more about Infosec, host-based forensics, this whole field, I got my master's through James Madison University in computer science. They have a specialty in Infosec, and it was really excellent. It was a lot of good foundational skills, just really good program. So I would encourage you to check that out if that's something you're interested or thinking about. And finally, what I need to say before I really get started here is I understand this is the red team track. I am not a red teamer. I am true blue. Defense is my thing. The only hacky thing I've really done here is that I have hack in the title of my talk. So I don't want to confuse people as to what this talk's about. I didn't do a lot of hacking, but I did use a HackRF. So bear with me. I think you'll think this is interesting nonetheless. And like I said, I worked for Chris Sanders, who wrote this book, and co-author on this book is Jason Smith. Both of those guys were sort of instrumental in what unfolded here to different degrees, and you'll learn more about that as we go. All right, so I have a really short amount of time to give you a whole lot of information. So in math classes that I took, you look up answers in the back sometimes, and you'd be like, how the heck did they come to this solution? I'm going to do the same thing here. There's going to be a lot of miracle steps you just have to go with me on because I don't have time to get into the details. Before I go too far, we'll see how this plays. If it seems like I'm parsing words at all while I'm up here, it's because I am. This issue that I'm going to talk about today is actually playing itself out in a state court in Vermont right now. So I need to be careful about what I say. I'm only going to say something I'd be willing to testify to under oath, because I realize this is being recorded in the event this were ever to become discoverable. So I'll be honest. Now, the story sort of starts in New Hampshire, which is where I'm from. The reason it starts there, for one thing in New Hampshire, you're indoctrinated very early on to love the Red Sox. The second thing, on our license plates, you'll see everywhere, live free or die. That's really important to me, and I think a lot of Infosec folks in general, because I think a lot of us have sort of a real libertarian streak. And that sort of becomes important in this story as we talk about property rights a little bit, but I think you should really be able to do as much as you want with your own property until the point that you're negatively affecting someone else. I'll leave it at that. So from New Hampshire, about 5 years ago, I moved out to Detroit. That's where I worked at GE. And I only mention that here because I need a way to tell you how the heck does someone end up in Thetford, Vermont. It's a small town in the middle of nowhere. Now, while I had a pretty good time working at GE, the raping, the pillaging, the high unemployment wasn't a place where I wanted to have the kids forever, so I wanted to come back to the Northeast where I'm from. My wife got a job in Thetford as a teacher. I'm pretty flexible. I can work in a lot of places remotely, so that's how we ended up in Thetford. It's in East Central Vermont, up in New England, very quiet, small town, safe place to raise kids, that sort of thing. Okay, now, when I get to Thetford, it's about 20 minutes from Dartmouth College. There's a big hospital there. Property is pretty expensive, more expensive than I was anticipating, certainly more expensive than Detroit. And so I'm looking around at houses, and I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I'm like, well, I can buy one of these really expensive houses, or I can build my own house. So I found some land, nice spot, 2-acre lot, pretty farm in the background there. Here's another picture after we started construction. This farm in the background becomes the focal point of the story. And if you look even closer, within the red circle up there, you can't see it, but just on the other side of that mountain or knoll is a cell tower, okay? In Thetford, like I said, it's very rural, so I don't have dedicated wired internet line. I don't have dedicated phone line. I depend on that cell tower up there because it has broadband wireless. So I have a special radio antenna at my house, radio modem, that's able to talk that, which gets me blazing speeds of about 3.5 megabits per second. It's only $200 a month, though, so it's a steal. And like I said, there's the cell tower there, so that's how I do my communication. But you can't see it. It's just over that line. And just to show you that I didn't build something that is like I don't think a terrible eyesore, there it is. This is where my story starts to go off the rails. So there's a road between my house and the neighbor next door. It's called Sonny Bean. When I was looking at buying land, I had no idea that Sonny Bean was actually named after a serial killer in Scotland. That's a clue that it might not be where you want to look to buy a house or build a house. In fact, you would think I was crazy if I saw Charlie Manson Boulevard and said, yeah, that's where I want to go. Same sort of idea. Some of you might remember this guy. This is Howard Dean. He ran for president in 2004. He was a long-serving governor of Vermont. Howard Dean, people have these general impression of him. A lot of people know him as the I Have the Scream, or a Scream speech, where he was very enthusiastic after, I think, a loss in Iowa. I see Howard Dean and I think of something different. When I see Howard Dean, I think of the guy that trounced a lady by the name of Ruth Dwyer, who ran for governor twice in the state. And there's different political reasons why I think she was trounced, but this is a true story. She was running when I just finished undergrad school up in Burlington, Vermont, and well, I follow politics. I'm not outwardly political. I'm not, I don't have bumper stickers all over my car. I'm not like volunteering at campaigns or anything like that. But Ruth Dwyer to me was, I found her to be very vindictive and very vicious sort of candidate. I've never seen anything quite like it. So I actually was going out the day of the election to pick up my friends to make sure they voted because I was that afraid of Ruth Dwyer's becoming governor of the state. And that's true. That was back in 2000 or 2002. So here's candidate Dwyer, who ran for governor. This was on, I think, C-SPAN in that same time period, okay? You can imagine how excited I was to learn that that red farmhouse across the street belonged to my new neighbor, Ruth Dwyer. And, so we had political differences, whatever. Didn't think it was a big deal. Until she decided that she really didn't like me. So henceforth, this will be known as the Thetford Wall. So after having lived there for, about a year or something, Ruth erected this 60 by 24 foot monstrosity. I'd like to tell you there's a good reason for it, but there's not. So we'll just leave it at that. In case you're wondering how it looks from my house, this was a scenic vista at Christmas time last year from the living room window. The good folks at NBC decided you might be interested in seeing how it looks from her side of the wall. So there's my eyesore that she's trying to defend against. I can only think of one reason why that's there, and I'm sure she can too. I'll leave it at that. I wanted to come back to Chris and Jason real quick. So Chris Sanders is the Thetford Wall. This is just a fantastic Twitter account. And actually, there's a couple good things here I want to point out with this. So first, Thetford Wall used to harass me a little bit, as the way that Chris does. Once in a while, Thetford Wall would tweet facts. This just made me sad. At Christmas time, Thetford Wall got a little sassy. And I like to end with this tweet from Chris, or the Thetford Wall, because it really explains how I felt about the situation and how my neighbors, other than Ruth, felt about the situation. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what the heck does this have to do with the HackRF? Well, here's what it has to do with it. Not my quote. What happened is, there's obviously things at play here, property value, things like that, right? So I go to the town, say, we've got to do something about this, there's no permit, that whole sort of issue that you go through. And in doing so, I contacted a lawyer. Now, to be clear, this is not the lawyer that represents me now in this matter. This was someone else I'd contacted that is a real estate property type lawyer. And he said, Patrick, I feel really bad for you. I've known Ruth for a very long time, and I think she might be one of the worst 5 people in the world. Now, I go to the meeting. We have a hearing to discuss the wall. So I'm there. Ruth is there. And, I'm telling my side of the story. I talk about how, I have this very tenuous internet connection that I rely on for work. If anything were ever to happen to it, I might have to move quickly. So it's like, this affecting my property value is a big deal to me. So Ruth was there while I talked about this. And her general thing, and this was a direct quote from her in this hearing, is that the wall was the least evil thing she could do. So that sort of set the stage for me. That's in my mind. Now, this hearing was on a Tuesday night. Go through the week, okay. I noticed that weekend there was a strange car at Ruth's farm that I hadn't seen before. It was there all weekend. I wake up, 7:30 or whatever on Monday morning to get to work. I go to sign on, and my internet connection is not working. And it was weird because it was like I would start to get the connection, but nothing would ever complete. And I couldn't talk out. I couldn't hit that cell tower. So this was very concerning. So fortunately, I was able to use the hotspot with my cell phone to be able to have some sort of even more ghetto internet service. for work, but I had to resolve this issue. So what I first did is I contacted my internet service provider and said, hey, what's going on here? And I was very fortunate because the guy that was the point of contact at this internet service provider, he was a guy from the Marine Corps. And he had done some work with signals there, and he was really knowledgeable. So he didn't come out, but he was looking to try and talk to my radio antenna at my house from the cell tower. And he says, you know, I don't know what's going on, but you have a ton of interference. And he said, you know, I'm not seeing it at other places. This is just at your place. He said, you know, he didn't know what to do, but he knew that something was not right. Okay, so at this point, what happened is, as an Infosec person, I'm kind of paranoid by default. You hate to think that your neighbor's doing something to screw with you this badly, but she did build a 60 by 24-foot wall. So what I first did at this point is I actually contacted Jason Smith, co-author of Chris's book. And I contacted Jason immediately because he is very, I don't know how to explain Jason. He's very honest. He's brutally honest. And I explained to him everything that I've just explained to you. And I said, Jason, I need to know, one, I've never dealt with this sort of signals-type traffic before. Like, I don't even know how to begin to investigate this. And I said, I need to know if I'm being crazy. Like, tell me if I'm wrong to think this. And he said, you know, I'd be very surprised if she was doing this, but he said, you know, I'd also be very concerned if I was you. So he's the one that put me onto the HackRF and said, you know, this is the information, this is the tool that you need that will at least get you to the point where you can start to figure out what's going on at your house. So I bought a HackRF, it was about $300, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a little small device. It can transmit and receive radio waves. It's got 3 SMA ports. One you just can plug an antenna into. It hooks up to USB on your computer. The other 2 SMA ports are just so you can sort of daisy chain multiple HackRF ones together if you wanted to make like a big array or something. But you can do some really powerful stuff with it. And like I said, I'm not an expert in a HackRF, but I did learn enough about it to sort of investigate in this case. So I sort of have to give you some idea of what was happening here. You can see in the bottom left corner there, that's my house while it was under construction. Ruth's farm is across the street. This is before the wall was built, so you can't see it, but it would sort of be in between our buildings. Zooming out, that star is where the cell tower is, where also the broadband internet signal comes from for me. And the little lightning bolt down in the corner is where I have a utility pole on sort of the high end of my house. Right up in here is the high point for land on my little lot there. So I have a utility pole there where I have my antennas set up to be able to get this signal. And what you'll see is that, like, I'm literally going, you know, right through here for that signal. To give you another view, this is that utility pole I just mentioned. Next to that red arrow, you see that big arm. That's my cell antenna that I rely on to speak. And just to the side of that, there's a little box right there, and that's my radio antenna. So the internet service provider actually controls that. I can't log on to that or anything. It's an Arrow S radio antenna, and it's sort of a neat little thing if you've never seen one before. Okay, so I was interested in the 2.4 gigahertz range. And the reason I was interested in that is because, as I pointed out earlier, that cell tower that has my ISP's equipment on it, you can't see that from my house. And if I could see it, if it was straight line of sight, they would have given me 5 gigahertz equipment. But because there's some tree cover there, the 2.4 gigahertz signals, they're better able to cut through that range. And another point I'll just make here is that in the 2.4 gigahertz range, in the US anyways, that's sort of split up into 11 channels that we use. All just slightly different frequency, so you can put different devices on there and to avoid conflicts. Now, at this point, I'm thinking that there's some sort of jamming operation going on, potentially. This thing persisted for weeks. So I wanted to point out to anyone that has a HackRF or is thinking about getting one that jamming signals like this is illegal, if that's in fact what's going on. This is just laws that support that. So seriously, be careful if you get a HackRF not to break the law, because there are serious penalties for it. $16,000 fine for each day that you're violating this. So at this point, now that I'm familiar with the law, I'm thinking to myself, this is great because I don't even care about the fines. I want a felony conviction, right? I want this ended. So I have the HackRF, and without going into a huge amount of detail, there's a really nice ISO. I use Pen2, which is a Debian flavor, to be able to run this stuff that I'm going to show you. The first thing I did on that, once you plug in the device to the computer, you just run HackRF info, and it tells you, okay, HackRF is found. So that's good. We're off to the races. I will say here that if you have that ISO, you really don't want to run it through a VM because of, I guess, the latency and some processing issues as it's going through the bus to that VM. It just doesn't keep up with capturing the signal as well as you need it to. So I installed this on a bootable thumb drive. It was a little tricky with my Mac. I had to do some hacking of the bootloader to get it to work, but I finally did, and it worked really well. So how do you interface with this? Well, this is what we call, in the HackRF world, this is the hello world of software-defined radio. So this was using help from GreatScottGadgets.com. The guy who's sort of the father of all this, Michael Ossman, has several excellent videos on how to do this stuff, use this stuff, build this stuff. So this is how I ended up doing this. And what I'm using here for a program is called GNU Radio Companion. And what that is, it's a front end for GNU Radio, which is sort of like a framework in C++ and Python to be able to interface with your HackRF. And what's cool about it is on the right, you have all these different options you can do for the HackRF, these different modules. So you're literally building a program out of just these blocks of code that you're sort of dragging and dropping. And like I said, I don't have time to go into the nitty-gritty details here, but up at the top, that's your most basic thing. That's your Osmocon source. And that's sort of like middleware to be able to integrate with the HackRF and GNU Radio. A couple things I'll just point out. When you go through this, you can set variables, which becomes really handy when you're trying to, thinking about changing frequencies and that sort of things. So those will carry on throughout this whole thing. These sliders here, audio gain allows me to control the volume. Channel frequency slider allows me to change the channel. What else do we have? And in this particular case, like I said, this is for a simple FM tuner, so I've got a WB-FM receive, doing some different math tricks to make it more clear, and that feeds to my sound card. But all this stuff was just drag and drop from over here, and then I'm just changing the variables. So it's really simple. You just need sort of a guide to go through this. And GreatScottGadgets.com is really great. So that will produce this when you run it. This is just a simple FM tuner. So what you get is, you see these there's signals that we're detecting, okay? And this is all in your standard FM radio range from 88 to 107 megahertz. And you see wherever we have a high point, we're picking up a pretty strong radio signal there. So we can literally listen to the radio on our computer. Now, I needed to know what would it look like if my router, my radio antenna, was getting jammed. So I found this, and essentially, from all the research that I've done, now mind you, one, it's illegal to jam, so I can't really do this. And two, I only had one HackRF, so I couldn't jam and then detect and see what it looked like. But the most consistent thing I found is that I would see a flooding of the whole spectrum there, of that 2.4 gigahertz. And this will be more clear in a minute, but like if I go back, so we have this signal that you can see very clearly defined interesting points. Here, it's just a flood. So I was sort of looking for something like that in the 2.4 gigahertz band. So that's good, but there's way too many variables still to figure out what's going on. FCC.gov is pretty cool because any device you have that has some sort of radio accessory has what's called an FCC ID. So you can take that, put it into fcc.gov or fcc.io, which is more simple to use, and it will give you a bunch of manuals back that are germane to that specific device. And that's really helpful when you're trying to do analysis like this. So for instance, and Michael Osman does the same thing on his site, but what I did here is I was curious about my own garage door opener, and I wanted to see what I could get as like a test. So they at fcc.gov, they had the internal view of what my garage door opener looks like. They have manuals for my garage door opener. They have schematics like this, very detailed. A pro tip here is if you print out schematics like this and you take a HackRF onto an airplane, you will get transferred to the line where they want to talk to you more. And they also show you what the frequency should look like for these different devices. This is actually for my wireless router, because I was curious about what that should look like as well. Okay, so now that you have a very high level of how that sort of works, this is what I did in my case, where I'm just trying to look at the 2.4 gigahertz range. So we don't really care about this stuff down here. This was just me messing around with stuff, trying to do cool things. But all I really care about is this guy and this guy. Here's my OsmoCon source again, so just a way to integrate with the HackRF. And here, with my FFT sync, FFT is fast Fourier transform. So if you've never taken Calc 3 or differential equations, it's there. So we don't need to go there, but that's just what it is. And what I'm doing essentially is I'm feeding the signal, and like I said, I got my variables here. So I set my slider, default value is 2.437 gigahertz. I think that's right at channel 6 maybe. This is an important one, your sample rate. So in this case, I have it set at 5 meg. And what that means is I can focus on a piece of the spectrum that's 5 meg wide. And I'll show you how that looks. So to sort of give you an understanding of what normal should look like, this is 2.412 gigahertz. You can see up here. So that's channel 1. And in this case, I tested it in a place where there was nothing going on, okay? So you just get this is static. There's nothing happening here. This thing that's popped up in the middle there, that's just sort of an anomaly. I think it's happening because some sort of division by 0, so we just ignore that and, like I said, roll with it. It's nothing. This green line is what's called the peak hold. Oops. That's the peak hold. Okay, so as this noise is happening here, it's just recording the maximum amplitude of that frequency. And that's helpful when you're trying to do analysis, because sometimes you'll see, things are just bouncing all over the place. Just be able to really look at it and analyze it. Having something that holds that peak or that maximum value is really useful. So this is a quiet day, nothing happening on channel 1. Now this was interesting because it was a test I did, again, to figure out more what's going on here and how it looked and how it worked. But we've got our 5 meg sort of range here from negative 2.5 to 2.5. And this is channel 10, maybe channel 11, I think. And what I had on this case was my Wi-Fi router. And you can see this is the signal I was seeing. And this is why that peak hold is so important when you're trying to look at this stuff. This is what I pulled from the FCC's website. Now, it's a little bit skewed just because of the numbers and such, but if you crunch this bottom one up, you see you almost start to get a little M here. And this was the only thing in my 2.4 gigahertz range that I saw that was remotely close. So I knew, okay, this is definitely my Wi-Fi router. I also knew that because I had my Wi-Fi router set to this channel. So it was a good test to see that this worked as it should work. At this point, there's still a lot of stuff, a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns that I need to figure out. So in searching around through my different signals, I was really curious about this one. And I think this is channel 10. What I learned about this signal, it sort of looked almost sinusoidal with a little hiccup here, right? But it's a very distinct signal. And what that is, it turns out, is this is actually my radio antenna that was up on the telephone pole. So, okay, cool, I'm starting to identify things on my network. I thought to myself, well, I can't control the radio antenna because I can't log on to that, but I can manually adjust the channel on my Wi-Fi router. So what happens if I do both? So I set my Wi-Fi router to channel 10, and what happened immediately is you have all this noise that occurs, and after 4 or 5 seconds, or actually what immediately happens is the Wi-Fi router stops working. Sorry. The radio antenna loses its signal to the tower, and it's sort of dead for 4 or 5 seconds, and in that time it starts looking for another channel that doesn't have interference that it can connect on. So it sort of moves itself to a non-cluttered channel. So I couldn't really visualize what's going on here. So this is sort of the best analogy I could think of to explain it. Because I figured out very quickly from here on what was going on. And what was going on is I had a lot of devices on my network. I think I had 8 of the 11 channels occupied by something. And what happened is that Monday morning, where my internet stopped working, by happenstance, a different neighbor decided to start using a Chromecast. So what happened with this Chromecast, and the other key piece of information is that my wireless router and the radio antenna, they were both on auto channel mode. So what would happen is when that Chromecast would come online, it would grab an open frequency, an open channel. It just so happened that in doing so, it caused either my wireless router or the radio antenna to change channels and to immediately interfere with each other. The problem is, one of them didn't just leave and go to, so now I have 2 open channels because that extra Chromecast that's out there has left me with 2 channels. So what would happen is, I have my wireless router and the radio antenna competing for one channel. Just as one gives up and it's like, okay, I'm going to go to this channel, the other device at the same time, I'm going to go look for a new channel. So it was this constant fighting between these two devices every time my other neighbor was using Chromecast. So in some ways, this was nice to know. I still felt bad that I didn't get the felony conviction that I wanted, because I still have this stupid wall to deal with. But at the end of the day, Ruth has her Thetford wall. I have the digital Thetford wall right here. So I was able to fix that. But in doing so, there's still a lot of other aspects of this story that I wanted to share, because they're things that not everyone, I guess, in our field deals with every day. And one of those is the media. So I've been really, for the last year, under a spotlight with the media, and I don't particularly care for it. But there are things that I learned that I think are sort of important to our field. So I'll start with the good. Valley News was sort of the local newspaper there that first started this story. And what I liked about that is there was a reporter that came out, she talked to me, she seemed genuinely interested in what was going on there with the Thetford wall. So I was sort of able to tell my story, and we had good conversation, and she would interpret that into the stuff that she wrote. At the end there, this is something I just noticed the other day when I was Googling, but this guy out of Washington wrote this story, and I liked the title. But what's good about it is that if you read his story, he was able to sort of sift through the noise and make sense of what was actually happening there. The bad, I would say, is just TV journalism in general was pretty terrible. So it started with CBS came out to interview me, and the interview with CBS went like, they actually scheduled something with Ruth, and they show up unannounced to me, and they gave me 30 seconds to tell my side of the story, and there's a lot of layers to this. And they just wanted to feed the hype machine, and you have someone that was almost governor of the state, so it's very controversial. They didn't care about what was actually going on, in my opinion. They cared about ratings. And no one's surprised by this, but what becomes frustrating is, they have their piece, which is based a lot on just what she says because she's the focus of the story. And it gets picked up by NBC, and it gets picked up by New England Cable News, and it gets picked up by Daily Mail in London, and it gets picked up by ABC. And it was in Atlanta, Arizona, California. It's been all over the country. It's been all over the world. And you keep seeing the same story that was in the TV media, and it doesn't square with reality. It's very skewed to what she had to say, because no one ever really cared what my side of the story was, because I'm not going to sell newspapers like Ruth is. I'll end with the ugly. So one of the first time I was aware that this was picked up by the national media was when this appeared on like a Saturday morning on Fox and Friends with this moron Tucker Carlson. And if you watch that story, it's really interesting because they interviewed Ruth. They didn't talk to anyone from the town. They certainly didn't talk to me. But it was a total hit job on me and my family, in my opinion, about what was going on there and how we're outsiders disturbing poor Ruth's animals and all these things. And it just wasn't true. Now, at this point, Ruth has sort of changed her story from all these reasons why she built the wall to my kids are bothering her animals when they play basketball. So I just wanted to show you what true evil looks like. And the reason why I think this is so important for our field, there's so many things going on right now that's in the news. There's so many policies that you hear discussion around. If you're talking about CISPA or the DMCA or the CFAA, all these things are important, and we have so many people in the news talking about it that have no idea what they're talking about. And I know you guys have all experienced that when you watch the news, especially with something related to cybercrime, and you hear a story and you're like, that's terrible. Like, that does not square with reality. And I think it's important that for people in this room and people in our field, anytime you have a chance to tell your story about, attacking a system or defending a network, you need to do it because people need to hear from people that actually have the facts and the truth. And the media, they want a good story, but they don't care so much about the truth. So it's really important to be calm and be persistent and keep getting your story out as it pertains to information security, and keep doing what you're doing. Now, I just have a couple of minutes here, but one of the things that came out of this for me, and like I said, I'm a blue teamer, so I was curious in using the HackRF defensively. So one of the things I did was I was curious about some work that was done at Black Hat or DEF CON, where there was an attack demonstrated on using a HackRF to be able to essentially steal someone's garage door opener login code. So what I think is cool is that this sort of stuff is being talked about, but where I want to see the conversation change is that, as I learned in going through this is signals from my garage door opener. These are all things that I know can easily be detected, right? So personally, as a defender, I'm really curious in being able to do some digital signals analysis here and doing something like running a HackRF where it's constantly looking at certain frequencies that I might be interested in, like at 315 megahertz where my garage door opener is on, that sort of thing. Because it's sort of the evolution, right? The attackers always have the edge and defenders are late to get there. But in this case, I feel like the attackers are just starting to scratch the surface with some of this stuff, and you hear stuff about funtennas where attackers are starting to have the capability where they can literally change or use software on specific hardware that can generate radio frequencies, and using that as a way to exfil data. Now that would be really cool because no one's looking at these different frequencies, on a wireless network or things like that, but they're things that we might want to start thinking about in the future from the defensive side. And just sort of wrap up my story, I don't know how this is going to play out in the courts, but I did plant about 220 trees. So there's a picture of one of my trees on the left, and you can sort of see about 100 of them on the right. Ruth also planted some trees. And that's really, that's about it. So that's the house with the trees, and this is where I'm left. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
Why not just switch your internal stuff all to 5.8 gig and to resolve the problem? You know you're using 2.4 for your...
I didn't know. I didn't know any of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And to me, it was a way to learn. Like, I just love learning about stuff, and so... And I also had devices that were reliant on the 2.4 thing too, right? Like, I've got an old Wii that the kids use, and like I said, this is this isn't my expertise, so it was a learning curve. Anybody else? Okay. Yes, sir.
You said you work with FireEye.
Yeah.
You also talked about how in the information security community it's important to publish our research.
Sure.
I know you're a blue teamer, and I come from a red team background. But at the same time, are there any ethical considerations with I understand you do what you do. I also do what I do. I'm a hobbyist, but working for larger corporations, organizations that kind of stifle research. Like FireEye recently sued somebody for trying to publish research at a time similar to this.
Well, I can't say too much about that. I'm not a lawyer. I will say I think that was sort of misconstrued in social media a little bit. And I'll talk to you offline about it, but I'm not qualified to speak for my company on that. So, anybody else? Okay, thanks a lot for the time, guys.
So, thanks, Patrick. Before you take off, we got a couple of giveaways. So, Patrick, can you think of a trivia question while you're doing this? And I got two that we'll start out. First trivia question. In HackRF, what was the, and this is for a red team field manual. In HackRF, what was the name of the green line? First hand, so back there. The peak hold line. That's correct. Here you go. For red team field manual. Second trivia question I got for you guys. He talked about his media coverage. There was some good. There was some bad. My question is, what is, and this is for a rubber ducky, by the way, so you want to start doing some Wi-Fi hacking a rubber ducky. What was the name of the newspaper that was in the good? Right there? Valley News, was that right?
That is right.
That was right. There you go. All right. And we got one more prize here for you. We got probably the best wireless Wi-Fi hacking antenna, USB Alpha wireless card. You come up with a trivia question?
Sure. What is the frequency that my garage door opener operates on?
Where was that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. There you go. There you go. All right, we got some giveaways after each of our talks, so don't run out in the middle of the talks, okay? All right, thanks. We'll get started in just another 7 minutes till the next talk.